I. And today I am bringing you a consensus series. I've teamed up with Matthew Aaron from Crypto 101 podcast, and we held multiple interviews at Consensus together, interviewing some of the guests and talking a little bit about blockchain, cryptocurrency, and some other cool topics. I hope you guys enjoy. Shout out to our first sponsors, Casper Labs. Casper Labs is building a fully decentralized blockchain infrastructure that really focuses on high performance without compromising on decentralization or resorting to off-chain settlements. CBC Casper is a proof-of-stake consensus that provides faster, safer, and more energy-efficient decentralized network consensus. As we've seen, one of the major issues with blockchain technology is most blockchains on the market today are not scalable. Without scalability, we face huge issues in terms of onboarding the next billion users into cryptocurrency. CBC Casper aims at solving this issue. If you want to learn more about Casper, head over to casperlabs.io.
Alex Wearn, CEO, co-founder, IDEX. Welcome to the Crypto 101 Evolvement podcast, collaboration with Matthew Aaron, myself, and Mr. Michael Schill. Nizen.
That's me. What's going on, guys?
What up, dude?
Alex, what's going on, man? How are you?
Hey, what's up, guys? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you on, man. How's the week going?
It's been good. Day 3 of the consensus week, but I guess it started last week on Thursday with Fluidity, so I'm ready for a little vacation after this.
Oh, man, I am perpetually drunk.
I'm drinking way too much caffeine. It's hard to function at this point.
Yeah, I'm trying to make sure I'm awake for the day events too. So yeah, mostly coffee over here.
I like it, man. I like it. All right, so getting right into it. For people that don't know, who are you and what is IDEX?
IDEX is the #1 decentralized exchange. We're the largest in terms of users, volume, transaction count, pretty much any measure you can think of. But we like to kind of clarify the decentralized part and really refer to it as a hybrid decentralized exchange. And I think we'll get into this a little bit, but it really has to do with kind of what parts of the application are you decentralizing and how are you approaching it. The first version of DEXs, they were pretty much fully on the blockchain, which meant it was more decentralized, but you had a lot of problems basically because blockchains are slow and expensive. So if every action you're doing on an exchange, you have to pay to the network and wait for the network to confirm it, it's not going to be a great UX. So over time, we've seen projects bring more and more of the application off-chain. And we have a kind of a particular perspective on that with our hybrid approach, where you have a centralized exchange that you do all of your actions in and a decentralized fund custody. So we never hold any funds, but everything that you do on IDEX happens in real time. So we think it's kind of the best of both worlds of centralized and decentralized.
Interesting. And what is the future of these decentralized exchanges? And I guess this is going to be a multi-part question because as we've seen with you as well as many others, you're taking the approach where it's becoming maybe required, and we can talk about that a little bit, to do KYC and things like that.
Can we, before we go into KYC and the future of the exchanges,
please.
Can we first just really quick talk about decentralized exchange, a hybrid exchange, and a centralized exchange, and just really do a quick overview so everybody understands what we're really talking about?
Absolutely. So centralized exchange is the one everybody's probably most familiar with. Coinbase, Binance. The key part about decentralization is around what happens to the funds. So when you deposit on one of those platforms, it goes into a wallet that they control. All of the trading that you do, it's within their own system. Nothing's happening on the blockchain. Mm-hmm. And then when you go to withdraw, you essentially request your funds back from the exchange and they send them to you on the network.
And who controls your keys there?
So during the process of trading, they're in charge of it, right? And you hear not your keys, not your Bitcoin, right? That was a refrain that a lot of people in the industry were saying, and the emphasis being that they control the crypto. If they get hacked, if someone comes to them and says for whatever reason that they can't service you or to take your crypto, there's really nothing you can do about it.
All right, hybrid.
So
as you just said.
Yeah, so maybe actually I'll do decentralized first because I think it sets up hybrid well. So decentralized exchange, there's, and this is where I think there's a bit of a confusion in the space because people use that term a little bit loosely, as did we when we launched, admittedly. And I think decentralization, there's different pieces of what's called the software stack that you can decentralize. So what most people are referring to is fund custody. So really flipping that centralized model where instead of giving your cryptocurrency to someone else, you're in control of it the entire time. Everything you do is requires authorization from your private key. So that's really kind of taking back control. And then there's other components of the exchange. So for example, the order book. And the question is, where does that order book live? so to speak, right? And in a fully decentralized exchange, it actually lives on a blockchain, meaning when you create an order, you then have to send it to a blockchain network. That network then mines that transaction and then places it for others to view, but by connecting to the blockchain.
Right.
The big challenge with that is every action requires using the network. So it's expensive. You're paying, in the case of Ethereum, you're paying gas, and then you have to wait. So you can imagine for market makers, if they're trying to cancel and update orders pretty quickly, a decentralized model is not going to be very well suited to them because you're paying a cost every time and you got to wait. So it's just not a great trading experience. So we've come up with the hybrid model, which is really about that balance, right? What do you do off chain? What do you do on chain to try to take advantage of what we think is the real selling point of decentralized exchanges, the custody piece, while insulating users from the other elements, the other headaches that can come from decentralization. And that's where I mentioned we've got the order books, the balances, really the whole exchange component is off-chain. You can almost think of it as a centralized exchange with decentralized fund custody. So when you deposit, instead of depositing it into a wallet we control, it goes into a smart contract. And then everything you do off-chain in our centralized infrastructure, create an order, for example, is accompanied by a signature so that we can send that to the network for settlement. So you can think of the smart contract as managing the funds, while the exchange manages everything else around the UX of trading, balances, order books, trade execution, etc.
How did this all start for you?
Yeah, my crypto journey. So 2011, rise and fall of Bitcoin, a Wired article. It was up to $28 and back down to $2. Dabbled a little bit, bought a little bit, but not enough that I'm, not here doing an interview and working on a business rather than on a private island. But yeah, really got excited with the launch of Ethereum and the idea of programmatic functionality. This idea that digital scarcity is a thing thanks to Bitcoin, and Ethereum now makes it possible to move those digital assets in a trustless is the term, a trustless way. We worked on a couple different things. We actually had a fully decentralized DEX that we were working on at first called EtherX. We saw some of the UX challenges that came from that. We pivoted over to a fiat-backed stablecoin. So this was early 2016. Tether was around a 200K market cap, and we launched on Ethereum. We got a little bit of traction, but then ultimately came back to the decentralized exchange idea with a little bit of insight around this hybrid model and how to make it more user-friendly. Launched in October 2017, and by January, as we were talking earlier, people had moved over from EtherDelta, and IDEX was the number one DEX in DApp since.
Yeah, I mean, you guys literally had the most perfect timing ever. I remember specifically, I think it was when the Matrix AI Network ICO came out, and all the traders online were like, okay, we got to go over to IDEX. We got to do this because EtherDelta was down for, I want to say like a 7-day period, was just struggling hard. Was that planned?
Yeah, we were talking earlier. We are not the black hat hackers behind that.
Not was the EtherScan plan, but was your timing to really come in strong at that point planned? Was that a strategy that you guys had built, or was this just like perfect timing?
Yeah, so we had launched in end of September 2017, early October, and we struggled for the first few months. One of the challenges was 0x had launched their protocol, so people kind of looked at us and said, well, what do we need another DEX for? Right? We've got EtherDelta, 0x is coming on the scene, all these relayers coming online. What do we need another one of these platforms? But we knew we were onto something with the usability. So, and I think you kind of speak to one of the user acquisition strategies we had was understanding that when certain projects were launching, there was a community there that if you got that community on your platform, you didn't need other markets, right? It was kind of a self-contained system of buyers and sellers, right? So we actually did some grassroots marketing, talking with those ICOs, getting out there and working within those communities to help show them that, hey, you're on EtherDelta now, but check out what we've built. We think it's pretty cool.
The DEX is like the holy grail of exchanging and buying and selling crypto. Everybody wants to control their keys, never have it leave their custody. It is also anonymous. It's just like I said, the holy grail of like the ethos of Bitcoin blockchain and this whole idea of sovereignty and controlling and being your own bank. But going back to what Michael asked a little bit ago, KYC AML, what's the future of exchanges? If you have KYC AML, is that almost like off the point? Missing the point?
Does it defeat the purpose of a DEX?
I don't think so, but we definitely have people debate us and say it does, right? So again, back to my earlier comment of like, what is the real consumer like pain point of a centralized exchange? Most of them, they might not like KYC, but I think that is in some ways the reality of the financial system in which we live. we'd love to see that evolve over time. It's a tool for law enforcement to help catch criminals. We think there are better tools than financial surveillance, but it's the reality of the world we live in, right? And certainly any exchange that interfaces with the traditional banking system has gone through that growing pain, right? They start out with this, hey, we're different. It's crypto. It's this new revolution, this new different thing. And then as they grow, these other pressures start to press on them.
With that, I understand the other pressures, and I'm going to be the skeptic in this one. All right. Yeah, so you have the other pressures, but I mean, if you keep caving to those other pressures, I mean, it's very easy to cave to those other pressures. It's easy to say, and you know what? Andreas had a speech in Ethereum Denver. I don't know if you saw it. He was talking about like the Ethereum fork after the DAO. And he said, once you show that you can roll something back or you can do this, you have now turned something that I won't do something to I can't do something. And can't and won't to a legal perspective or a government or an authority is two different things. Now, when you keep caving to these different, maybe criticisms because of KYC, AML, or any other kind of regulatory, I mean, now you're just turning into basically what the system we have. And now you are just part of it, but using a different platform. Do you agree with that statement?
So I don't agree, because I think in our case, we still have the benefit of self-custody, right? So that's kind of where I was going with that last comment, is if you ask people like what sucks about trading on a centralized exchange, pretty much not much, right? Like the UX is great. Like, let's be honest, right? The UX is great. Liquidity is great. They got customer service.
Right.
The thing that sucks is I leave my funds there and they might be lost, right?
Yeah.
So that's really the big pain point of the centralized exchanges. So, and now to your point of this open, permissionless, no identifying information required, like we believe in that future.
Right.
The question is, how do you get there? And we kind of looked at that with the first product we built had that ethos in mind, but it wasn't a good product and nobody wanted to use it, right? Because it was slow, it was costly, it was hard to get liquidity because of all these like kind of drawbacks. So the reality is the technology is just not there to create the product that will both attract users and have those properties. So we're kind of taking a different approach, right? We're looking at what is the environment now? How can we build a product that we think will get all of those users, keep the self-custody element? And I think self-custody is interesting because we look at this as not just you and I being able to custody, but it's really about integration of all custody solutions. So you and I will be able to trade against larger custodians who are trading on behalf of their customers. That's really how we see you kind of pooling liquidity is whatever your method of custody, you can be in control of that process from end to end, but you can plug into this open network of a smart contract for escrow and settlement and trade with anyone else. So you get to choose your method. But the reality is that because we have a role in operating it, there are some regulatory things that we need to abide by. The question is, what does the future look like? Will the technology advance to the point where you actually can turn this into a fully decentralized network in the sense that we're actually not operating any of these pieces and you can actually incentivize people to do those other functions? So support could be incentivized through a token economic system, right? The system could pay out for those to do those other jobs and all that other work that's required to make it run.
Since you've implemented this, at least what I perceived was online, like you had some pushback from the digital community, on the Twitter community specifically. That's where I spend a lot of time. How has it affected your user base, if at all?
So that's the interesting thing, right? And I think this kind of points to what do users care about versus what do thought leaders in the space care about, right? And so it's easy when it's not your business to be a kind of a side critic and say they're not sticking with what the industry, the vision of the industry or the philosophy, as you were saying, of the industry. But when you look at, how do you actually get to that future? You got to make these hard choices sometimes. And so what we saw from a user perspective was there was blowback publicly around the announcement. We saw a little bit of a drop then. But actually, that was more of a drop than we're working to implement it, and that was actually more of a drop than the actual implementation itself. Right? Was just this company's now doing this thing I disagree with. I'm going to look for an alternative. But for those who really like the product and understand, the other value propositions around self custody, they're on board. I will say the other thing that's interesting is, if we want this industry to really go mainstream, you have to court a lot of the existing players, and they are large enough that they are not willing to take this kind of a regulatory risk in this sense.
Right.
So we have a lot of market makers and liquidity providers that are coming onto the platform now because they have some level of KYC that they can point to their compliance department and say, hey, they're doing their job. This satisfies our requirements to trade on this platform.
Where are you based out of?
I'm based out of Chicago.
What about the company?
So the company is a Delaware parent. We have a Panama subsidiary and a U.S. subsidiary.
Okay, and how does that work legally for the KYC AML?
Yeah, so the big question is around where are your customers?
Right.
That's ultimately what it boils down to. So we'd like to be an international company that continues to serve customers in every jurisdiction. So, one of the examples of what KYC allows us to do, there's certain assets that might have different classifications in different jurisdictions. We're unable to list those right now because we can't be certain that, for example, U.S. customers don't have access to them. They suggested that IP blocks are not sufficient to guarantee or to feel comfortable that you're doing kind of your duty to prevent U.S. customers from accessing those. So
as of now, U.S. customers cannot access.
No, they're able to access IDEX.
Okay.
I was saying specifically, we're looking at there's some tokens that are maybe like a derivative of another asset.
Okay, gotcha.
It's unclear how the U.S. will treat those. So we'd like to offer it to the rest of the world. But if we don't know who you are and we can't guarantee, then it's something that for the time being we haven't listed. So, that's kind of just a bit of a side note. One of the real interesting challenges we've run into is from a tech perspective, listing all this stuff is easy, right? A token's a token. A user is a wallet, right? Like that, the global, like the borders, the issues are not on the actual like acquiring customers or giving them the service. It's around like what is the corporate structure behind this, because these assets, they look like a token, but it could be a utility token, a security token, a derivative, a commodity, all these different things, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're like that's the big issue with all this stuff, especially with being based in the U.S. or at least partially based in the U.S. is like if you're listing a security, then you're going to have major issues.
Yeah, and so the interesting thing is it's actually, and we thought this when we started too, it's not necessarily where you're based or where you're incorporated, it's who are your customers. So if you serve a U.S. customer, then the U.S. government now has jurisdiction. Question becomes, are they going to try to enforce it? I think Binance is, one of the most interesting companies in the space with their regulatory arbitrage strategy. They're moving from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, trying to stay ahead of certain things. It's worked so far. We'll see how it works long term.
Right. Interesting. And do you like what Binance is doing when it's like you said, legal arbitrage? And what if they close down like a big section of your business?
So it's interesting because I think financial regulations tend to be more serious than other types of regulation. The great example is Uber, right? They basically went into all these cities, said, screw your taxi regulation, screw your lobbyists, like screw your local municipality laws around ride sharing and that sort of thing. And they fought each city one at a time if necessary. They got shut down in some areas, but they just grew fast enough that now airports have to make an Uber section, right? I don't know if you guys were flying into LaGuardia or something. Yeah, if you ordered an Uber, it's now bigger than the taxi stand. Right.
Went out to the island. Exactly.
They've got a whole system set up for all the Ubers to come in, and they've, for a while they banned it, and then you had to do like these illegal pickups, or they'd be like, meet me at departures, right, and like sneak into the back of the Uber. But now it's it's gotten to the point where it's become accepted. It's a little trickier when it comes to finance, simply because of the laws around AML and terrorism financing.
Right.
Most of the world takes that really seriously, and they think if there's a risk that you're engaging in that, then you can get some heat for it. So I don't think that's Binance's intent, right? I think they're an honest company. I think they've shown themselves to again and again do right by customers. I think it remains to be seen how some of the governments of the world perceive some of those actions.
And staying on the topic of Binance, you're talking that you've created this hybrid model that seems pretty unique to IDEX itself.
Yep.
Binance is coming out with the DEX. Is the hybrid model they're creating similar to what IDEX has created, or are they creating a whole different kind of model for themselves?
Yeah, so they're creating a different model for themselves. So there's a couple thoughts on Binance. So a lot of it depends on the success of Binance chain and getting assets on that chain, right? So the way you're going to get other currencies right now is through bridges, things like getting a Bitcoin onto Binance chain. You have what's called a trusted bridge. So I don't know if you guys remember BitShares, if you're familiar with that. It's actually a very similar model to Binance. They have their own chain, assets that are issued on that chain. If you want to bring something else onto it, you need a trusted party to create it.
Right.
So we've seen they've had some limited success with that, but it's kind of, in our mind, it defeats some of the purposes of non-custodial if the assets you're trading, have a party behind it. It's kind of like the debate between fiat-backed stablecoins, right? To their point, it serves a purpose in terms of liquidity, right? So I think that remains to be seen. Some of the other elements, it's fully on-chain, so it's not a hybrid model, which obviously we've given our perspective on why we think that's kind of the way to go for the best trading UX. And then it's got a small number of validators currently all run by Binance. So, we're really looking not to create our own protocol. We're looking to bring IDEX to every blockchain, right? So that's kind of our vision is long-term trading every cryptocurrency using your wallet and private keys to authorize the transaction. So we've got elements of centralization that we think are necessary to create the great product. But if you ever disagree, you're free to leave at any time. You're always in control of your crypto.
I like that.
Man, I was talking to a Forbes writer just last night at the Binance Charity event, and he said CZ is again this year at $1 billion. $1 billion.
No doubt it, man.
CZ, man. Are you CZ balling it with your IDEX?
I'm not CZ balling it, as I mentioned, but no, we've had some good success. We're excited, right? And I think
Can you just tell us how the monetization process works and revenue and things like that? Because I think when people think of decentralization and exchanges, they don't know where the money comes from, how you guys make money, how you keep yourself sustainable, how do you keep building and maintaining your servers and what have you.
So a couple of comments there. So we have a fee structure similar to other exchanges, 10 basis points on the market maker and 20 basis points on the taker. We also have a token that's involved in the kind of operations of IDEX. So I mentioned that our long-term vision is still how can we put together pieces of technology to make a fully decentralized platform. We don't think everything runs on a blockchain. That's not the solution, we don't think. But you can use other technologies, and you can still use the idea of kind of a token to incentivize actors to build from different pieces a decentralized system that trades blockchain-based assets. So right now we have nodes in our network that are running the staking process of IDEX, and they're actually getting paid 25% of the trading fees that IDEX earns is going out to stakers. So I guess just on Sunday, we closed our last staking period. It's every 2 weeks, and we paid out, I think it was like 85 ETH to those stakers. So about $20,000 got paid out to stakers. So so the yield right now is, I want to say, around 20%, and it's a payout in Ethereum. So it's a pretty cool model. Over time, we're going to bring more and more of the application to run on this network. So it's going to become an even more critical part of our operations, with the goal of improving decentralization, transparency, and also helping use that token to help kind of catalyze the network effect of an exchange, right? So the only way to earn the token is by trading on IDEX. So the more you trade, the more tokens you earn, the more you're able to stake and earn from fees of IDEX. So we're trying to kind of get that virtuous cycle, that network effect going of that's kind of unique to tokens, right? Being able to incentivize behavior, in this case, bringing more of your liquidity, more of your trading on IDEX. And as IDEX grows, you get some of that benefit flowing back to the stakers.
Yeah, man. I mean, that was one of the most unique things I think about IDEX when I was much deeper into trading when you guys were really starting to pop. So I think the incentive structure you guys had going was really unique. It was really interesting. It was really different. And I guess I kind of want to know, you guys have IDEX that is and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of like a subsidiary or like owned by Aurora. Is Aurora just planning on is this just one funnel fully focused on the DEX, or are you looking at multiple different avenues that you could pursue?
It's funny. So we actually just last week,
and really quick, adding to that, what is Aurora?
Yeah. So I was going to address that first. So just last week, we actually ditched the Aurora brand and everything's come under IDEX simply because of questions just like yours, right? So the idea is exactly what you alluded to, though. So it was a parent brand. IDEX was our first product. We've got intentions to create other products, but what we realized was that everybody knew us by IDEX, right? And when something's working, don't fight against it, right? Agreed. So we've embraced it and we brought everything under the IDEX brand. We do have some ideas of other products that we can add in the future. So one of them is, I mentioned we worked on a fiat-backed stablecoin in like early 2016, and we're trying to think about how can you create a currency for the digital world, but one that has some of the learnings from traditional economic policy. So one of the ideas is that you want currency supply to be able to fluctuate and meet demand. So if a lot of people want the currency, it's not necessarily great for economic activity if the price of it goes up as more people buy it, right? It's interesting for Bitcoin because it's trying to become a new kind of reserve currency, a new store of value. But if you want something to be used every day, then stability is a pretty important thing and often talked about in the industry, right? So we're trying to think about how we can use IDEX itself to be kind of the backstop of a new stable asset. So this stable asset can be used for trade fees on IDEX. We'll always guarantee its value based on kind of the conversion rate of any other trade fees that we're collecting. The end goal is to then expand it to other applications, have them start accepting it as well, and it kind of becomes the digital currency of this ecosystem. So it can fluctuate to meet demand for those products in order to help keep it at a stable price.
Exchanges, large exchanges, small exchanges, they're all pretty much a victim to some kind of either hack exit scam, or so on and so forth in the space the past. We've just seen a lot this year. We've seen a lot of things happen this year. I just have to ask like some low-hanging fruit questions here. And I think most of them come with a little story with it as well. So I apologize for my storytelling. Crypto company I know is listed on an exchange. It's a smaller exchange. They not only have a listing fee. I want to know if you have listing fees, how people get on the exchange. And the other one is they weren't making volume. So therefore they gave them an ultimatum. It's like, you pay us $3,000 a week for us to create the volume that we want on the exchange, or we're going to kick you off. What do you have to say about that, about IDEX? Will you guys manipulate volume? What is up with the trading fees? How do you get listed? And is it transparent?
First off, obviously we're very much against the volume manipulation. I think it's a very short-sighted approach, right? Like, let's get people excited, but it's not actually adding value. And if you kind of pull behind the curtain, you see that there's nothing of substance behind it. So,
right.
It's funny to see Binance at like number 12 on volume, and like, any of those exchanges above, I just, I don't really believe it. It's something nobody's heard of, and somehow it's now the number one exchange.
Right.
So I think that's actually detrimental to the industry. It gives a talking point for those outside of it too.
Right.
Like, crypto is pretty awesome already. It's doing a great job. It's getting a lot of interest, a lot of users,
right,
and it's continually growing. Like, we don't need to fake it, right? But I get it, right? They're trying to play the game of attracting customers with volume, and then get companies to pay listing fees. So
but then if tokens on your exchange and they're not creating the volume, are you going to kick them off, or how does that work?
No, so we generally try to keep projects around if they're an honest project. If it's something that we're talking with the team and they got a community that they're building. We do have some costs by having projects on. So if we have removed some projects that haven't traded in literally at all in the last 90 days. It's a little bit different scenario. We're kind of trying to call the list and make sure that it's relevant to people that show up.
What does not traded at all mean? Does that mean like $1,000 a week or $1,000 an hour, or just
literally no trades?
No, yeah. Okay, got it.
So I mean, like, who's missing it kind of thing.
Okay.
So one of the interesting things about having the smart contract is it's impossible to fake volume.
Right.
So these exchanges, they just the term is print trades to the tape, meaning they send things out as if it happened, but nothing actually happened on their exchange, right? And you can't do that on IDEX because it's got to happen on the network. You got to see it settle in the contract.
So what about listing fees, man? Do you have listing fees? How much are they? And is it impossible for just normal coins to get on there? Is it like we're going to see a bull run? You're going to say, yep, $1 million to go on here.
No, so when we originally launched, we didn't have any sort of listing fee. What we found, though, was that we do have some costs in terms of talking to projects, either bringing them into the funnel, and then now we have to do audits of every project that comes to us. Mm-hmm. We've seen, you'd be surprised how many people break what should be a standard. So we do some audits. The ERC20 standard should be pretty simple to implement. Yeah, but they, for whatever reason, rip out functions or flip certain things. So we do have a super small fee. It's a few $1,000s simply to cover those costs. But yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to an exchange the other night with someone else just at an event, and they were asking about listing fees, and someone said, "Oh, it's 20 to 30 Bitcoin." And the guy that's standing next to me goes, "Oh, that's really cheap." And like, you hear rumors about some of those prices, but it's crazy that, $250,000 is cheap. So, I think that's another element that it's not great for the space. It rewards a certain type of behavior, raise a ton of money, get a bunch of hype. It doesn't reward build quietly, create a product, get some users and adoption. So I think that's another practice that needs to change as the landscape matures.
Right on.
Agreed. It's kind of like people paying to speak at crypto conferences. Like, what?
Yeah.
I think something that's different, and correct me if I'm wrong, about IDEX is the fact that you can't necessarily pull an exit scam because everybody owns their own coins. Am I like right on that? Like, you can't have a situation like some of the other exchanges out there right now that we see that are forced to shut down and people are losing their money, or the founder exits or leaves or dies or something and people lose their money because it's locked on an exchange that they actually don't own the keys to. That's kind of what makes IDEX unique. Am I correct about that?
That's absolutely right. And we were talking earlier about, is there a point to decentralization if it's not open, permissionless, and if you have KYC, for example? And this is exactly that point. Something happens to us, something happens to our site, our company, right? you don't have to worry about your funds. They're always yours. You can always go directly to the Ethereum network. So unless the Ethereum network dies, in which case, good luck getting any value out of your coins anywhere. Unless the Ethereum network dies, you can always get your assets back, which is just a pretty cool concept. And I think that's very much in line with the crypto ethos. I think one of the things talking about decentralization is I don't necessarily think decentralization is an end goal. I think it's an interesting tool to help alleviate some of the negative effects of centralization, right? So people talk about like data sovereignty. Like how can you use decentralization to take back control of your data? Facebook and Google have been making billions of dollars off monetizing it. People are now trying to think about, how can you give that control back to the user? This is similarly around exchanges, control of the assets. How can you allow people to trade with one another while still giving them ultimate control? And that may be an end user directly. It may be an entity on behalf of many users, right? We don't think that everyone's going to want to manage their own crypto, right? The be your own bank slogan is great if you trust yourself more than a bank. And I think there's a lot of people
I
that
don't. I absolutely don't.
If they admit it, don't trust themselves more than a bank, right? So that's a lot of it as well, is giving choice. If you want to be the individual going direct, great, we can have you. If you want to trust a third party who manages it on your behalf, they can trade with them as well. So it's really about that open approach to custody, which we see winning out long term.
Now, do you trust yourself more than a bank?
Depends on the day.
That's true, man.
Depends on the day.
That is 100% true. And it's not that I actually trust myself more than a bank. I don't think that's it. I trust the systems and institutions in place that the bank has wrapped up in it, like the FDIC insurance, the backed by the U.S. government, support and what have you. Like that's what I trust more than the bank itself.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I think you're seeing those sort of systems being built in crypto, right? Like we were talking with other companies, they're doing an insurance process on your transactions, and it's like you pay a small fee to be a part of this, and then your transactions are insured like up to a certain amount. And they're basically just like, look, we can see like how many of these are actually, keys are getting stolen. We can calculate the risk. And if you want to participate in this pooled risk, this insurance plan, we think we can make a business out of it. So it's interesting to see these same products being reinvented in a more open, kind of transparent manner. I think that's a lot of what gets me excited.
So I just want to go and ask this one more time to be very clear. With these exchanges, we are surprised all the time by how hacks and things are happening. A founder dies, the private keys are lost, APIs, somehow take funds. You do a huge social hacking experiment and people get socially hacked and what have you. And even with the Binance case, if it wasn't for their safe fund, I mean, they would have problems because, they're just luckily smart enough to plan for that and actually care about their customers. And CZ is one of those guys that's willing to take the brunt of anything that's getting thrown at him, as he was doing AMAs like 5 minutes after, which was
on 30 hours of staying awake or something.
I know.
Kudos to CZ.
I know. Kudos to that. I mean, he wasn't afraid of any question. He was like, I'm going to answer this. This is what it is. And I'll do more, whatever. Is there any way people that can get funds stolen from your account besides them getting personally hacked?
No, so the risk, there's always the risk in blockchain that there's an error in the smart contract, right? So, people ask me like, how do I know the smart contract's perfect? And you're like, how do you know Bitcoin's perfect, right? Like time is one of the things, right? You can have people, of course you have people audit it, right? You have people pour it over, people take a look at it, but like this whole stuff is new, right? So Zcash had a vulnerability, reported recently.
Bitcoin had one too.
Bitcoin had one that like luckily they patched without people knowing, but like this stuff is new. It's still experimental. Some days there was a big kind of kind of kerfuffle when Vlad a couple of years ago, Vlad Zamfir, he made a tweet about Ethereum like Ethereum is not ready for billions of dollars of value on it. Like it's still experimental tech. And like I think in some ways that's correct. There's the space is unique because it allowed for this funding model of ICOs that got a lot of attention, got a lot of capital into the space. But in many ways, the tech is still very much in its infancy. So I think it's really interesting to see kind of that tension of a tech that's not yet ready for mainstream, but has a spotlight on it. So, we're doing our best to build the best products with what we've got.
Right.
I love it, brother. Thank you so much for coming on, man. It's good to meet you in person. It's good to see what you guys have done. I mean, I've been a part of it since inception. So I appreciate you coming on, man. Appreciate you sitting down and chatting with us and clearing stuff up. And good luck with everything, man. Good luck with everything.
Thank you.
How can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, Alex Wearn. Wearn. IDEX.io is the website. So come check out our trading platform. We got links to Twitter and Discord in the footer if you want to come join our community.
Yeah, and I got to say one thing. One of the favorite things I love about IDEX, and I haven't been on it in a few months because I haven't been trading. I've been very busy. But one of the things that I loved was the fact you can just plug your ledger right into it and trade straight from your ledger.
Yeah.
One of the really, really, really cool features. So shout out to that. That's what made me really switch over from Ether Delta.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, I mean, that's the end goal, right? Whatever you want, ledger, private key, custodian, plug in and trade with one another. That's the vision. That's why we're here that's why we're doing things on a blockchain, right? If not, just, I don't know, put it all on Goldman servers and be done with it.
Exactly. Love it, man. All right, brother. Thank you so much for coming on.
All right, brother.
Thanks, fellas. Good to be here.